Rain doesn't wash away your sins, it just makes your cheap shoes leak. Harper learned that clutching a damp cardboard box outside the firm that just fired her for a positive pregnancy test. Then the black Bentley pulled up. He didn't offer a tissue, he offered ruin. Nausea rolled through Harper's stomach, a greasy, heavy sensation that tasted like the dirty pennies at the bottom of a forgotten purse. She kept her eyes fixed on the grain of the mahogany conference table. The wood was polished to a high gloss, reflecting the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the 42nd floor. "It's not about the condition, Harper," Gregory Caldwell said. His voice was smooth, practiced. It sounded like an HR seminar playing at half speed. She finally looked up. Caldwell was wearing a tie that cost more than her monthly grocery budget, a garish purple silk thing that clashed with the ruddy, broken capillaries around his nose. He smelled of expensive gin sweated out through cheap pores, masked heavily by peppermint mouthwash. "It's about performance," Caldwell continued, steepling his fingers, "and availability. We are entering Q4. The demands are going up. We simply can't accommodate a drop in efficiency, you understand." She didn't. Or rather, she did, but the barefaced lie of it tasted like ash. 3 days ago, she was his star account manager. She had brought in the Miller account working until midnight, her eyes burning out from staring at spreadsheets until the numbers bled into little black ants marching across the screen. Yesterday morning, she had thrown up her morning coffee in the employee restroom. Brenda from accounting had heard her. By lunch, the whispers had started. By 3 o'clock today, she had been summoned. "I haven't dropped in efficiency, Gregory," Harper said. Her voice was terrifyingly steady. She wasn't crying. Crying was for women who thought tears could buy them mercy. Harper knew exactly what kind of room she was in. It was a slaughterhouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. "My numbers are up 12% from last quarter. Metrics can be interpreted in many ways," Davis from HR chimed in. He was a small, sweaty man who looked like he spent his life apologizing to stronger men. He pushed a manila folder across the mahogany. "Here is your severance package. 2 weeks' pay. We'll need your key card, your corporate laptop, and you'll need to vacate your desk by 4. 2 weeks. Harper's hand drifted, almost imperceptibly, to her flat stomach. The gesture wasn't maternal. It was a reflex of pure, cold panic. Rent was due in 10 days. The electric bill was sitting on her kitchen counter, a bright pink final notice. And deep inside her, a microscopic cluster of cells was demanding a future she could no longer afford to give it. "Sign on the dotted line, Harper," Caldwell said, checking his Rolex. It was a dismissive flick of the wrist. "Let's keep this professional." She picked up the plastic pen. It felt impossibly heavy. The ink scratched against the cheap paper. She didn't read the non-disclosure clause. She didn't read the waiver of right to sue. She just signed her name, the letters jagged and unfamiliar, a forgery of the woman she had been an hour ago. The walk back to her cubicle was a study in sensory deprivation. The office hummed with the sound of ringing phones, the ozone smell of the heavy-duty printers, the rhythmic clicking of manicured nails on keyboards. But to Harper, it was all muted, buried under the roaring ocean in her ears. She found an empty Xerox box near the supply closet. The cardboard was rough, scraping the sensitive skin of her knuckles as she folded it into a square. She packed her life in under 3 minutes. A framed photo of her late mother, a half-empty bottle of generic ibuprofen, 3 blue pens, a wilted pothos plant in a cracked ceramic mug. No one looked at her. Her colleagues, the people she had shared birthday cake with, the ones she had covered for when they were hungover, suddenly found their monitors utterly fascinating. They were preserving the infection protocols of corporate America. Do not look the fired employee in the eye, lest their bad luck become contagious. She swiped her badge one last time to exit the glass double doors. The light turned red. She was locked out. The heavy thud of the magnetic lock engaging behind her felt like a coffin lid slamming shut. The elevator ride down took 80 seconds. Harper counted them. She stood in the mirrored box, staring at her reflection. Her skin was sallow, bruised with exhaustion under her brown eyes. Her cheap black blazer hung loosely over her shoulders. She looked exactly like what she was, a disposable cog, easily replaced, currently malfunctioning due to an unauthorized biological process. She gripped the bottom of the cardboard box, the edges dug into her palms. It grounded her. Pain was real. Pain was better than the numb, terrifying void yawning open in front of her. She stepped out into the lobby. The revolving doors spun endlessly, spitting suits out into the grey afternoon. October rain in this city wasn't romantic. It wasn't the kind of rain that washed the streets clean or provided a cinematic backdrop for a kiss. It was a spiteful, freezing, sideways assault. It smelled of wet asphalt, diesel exhaust, and rotting garbage. Harper pushed through the heavy glass doors and hit the wall of cold air. The wind whipped her hair across her face, sticking the strands to her wet cheeks. She had forgotten her umbrella. Of course she had. When she left her apartment at 6 this morning, the sky had been a bruised, deceptive purple. Now it was a solid sheet of slate grey, dumping ice water onto the concrete. She walked. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from the towering glass monolith of Caldwell and Associates. Her sensible black pumps, bought on clearance at a discount store, immediately filled with icy water. Every step was a squelch, a miserable, squeaking announcement of her failure. The weight of the box strained her forearms. The cardboard was already darkening, turning mushy under the downpour. She made it 2 blocks before her body gave out. The nausea, which had been simmering as a low-grade threat, suddenly flared into a violent, overwhelming demand. Harper stumbled toward an alleyway between a dry cleaner and a shuttered deli, dropping the box onto the wet pavement. The ceramic mug shattered. The pothos plant spilled its dry dirt into a puddle, turning instantly to mud. Harper leaned against the rough brick wall, her palms scraping against the grit and dry heaved. Her stomach contracted violently, emptying nothing but bitter bile onto the pavement. She gagged, gasping for air, the cold rain mixing with the hot, sour taste in her mouth. When the spasms finally stopped, she slid down the brick wall. The rough surface caught her blazer, tearing a thread. She hit the ground, her knees pulling up to her chest, right next to the muddy remains of her desk plant. That was when the dam broke. It wasn't a pretty cry. There were no silent, glistening tears rolling down porcelain cheeks. It was a guttural, ugly, chest-heaving sob. Her nose ran, mixing with the rain, and the cheap mascara melting into black, stinging rivers in her eyes. She wiped her face with the back of a freezing, shaking hand, smearing the mess further. She was crying for her job. She was crying for the electricity bill. She was crying for the terrifying, impossible reality of the tiny life growing inside her. And she was crying because she was utterly, completely alone. The hum of the engine was so deep she felt it in her chest before she heard it over the rain. A black Bentley, sleek and monstrous, idled at the curb, blocking the mouth of the alley. The headlights cut through the grey afternoon, casting long, stark shadows across the wet pavement. Harper didn't look up. She didn't care. If it was a street sweeper, it could just wash her away into the gutter. A door opened. The heavy, expensive click of it cut through the noise of the traffic. Footsteps approached. They weren't hurried. They were measured, heavy, leather soles splashing deliberately through the puddles. A shadow fell over her, blocking the rain. Harper blinked through the stinging mascara, looking up past a pair of handmade Italian leather shoes, past impeccably tailored dark trousers, up to a face that made her breath catch, interrupting a sob. Roman Rossi. He didn't look like a saviour. He looked like a storm given human form. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscle ticked under the olive skin. His dark eyes, usually cold and unreadable, were narrowed as they took in her pathetic state. The ruined clothes, the shattered mug, the snot running down her face. She knew him. Everyone in the financial district knew of Roman Rossi, though few actually knew him. He was the phantom buyer, the ruthless venture capitalist whose money had origins no one dared to audit. 6 months ago, he had come into Caldwell's office for a brief negotiation. Harper had been the one to bring him the quarterly reports. She remembered the sheer, suffocating weight of his presence in the room, the way Caldwell had sweated through his shirt just shaking Roman's hand. But 3 months ago, Harper had known him differently. A dim hotel bar. A night where she had just lost her promotion to a male colleague who played golf with the boss. 2 glasses of bourbon. A stranger in a dark suit who hadn't asked her about her job, who had just looked at her like she was the only living, breathing thing in a room full of ghosts. A hotel key, a frantic, desperate escape from reality. He had called himself Vittorio. She had slipped out before dawn, leaving nothing but a dented pillow. "Get up," Roman said. His voice was a low, abrasive rumble. It wasn't a request. Harper stiffened, her defense mechanisms snapping into place despite her misery. "Go away!" Her voice was hoarse, cracking on the syllables. She wiped her nose with the sodden sleeve of her blazer. Roman didn't move. He reached inside his bespoke suit jacket, which was getting ruined by the rain, not that he seemed to notice, and pulled out a pristine white linen handkerchief. He held it out. "You look like a drowned rat, Harper," he said softly. The fact that he knew her real name sent a shockwave through her nervous system. She stared at the handkerchief. It looked ridiculously clean. She snatched it from his fingers, ignoring the brief electric brush of his skin against hers, and scrubbed at her face. It smelled faintly of cedarwood and very expensive laundry detergent. "I was fired," she spat out, the words tasting like poison. She didn't know why she was telling him. Maybe because he was the only person who had stopped. Maybe because the memory of his hands on her skin in that dark hotel room was the last time she'd felt safe. "So if you're here to buy Caldwell's firm, tell him he's a piece of trash for me." Roman's eyes flicked to the soggy cardboard box, then back to her face. His gaze lingered on her pale, shivering form. He saw the way she unconsciously kept one arm wrapped protectively around her abdomen. A terrifying, razor-sharp stillness settled over him. The ambient noise of the city seemed to mute around them. "Fired," he repeated. The word was flat, devoid of inflection, yet it carried a lethal weight. "Just leave me alone," Harper whispered, her anger dissolving back into shivering exhaustion. She tried to push herself up using the brick wall, but her legs felt like lead. Her heels slipped on the wet concrete. Before she could fall, his hands were on her. They were hot. Even through her wet clothes, the heat radiating from his palms was startling. He gripped her upper arms, hoisting her to her feet with effortless, terrifying strength. "You are freezing," he muttered, his breath ghosting over her wet hair. He didn't ask her if she wanted a ride. He didn't offer polite platitudes. He simply kept one heavy, warm arm wrapped around her waist, half carrying, half walking her out of the alley and toward the idling Bentley. The driver, a man built like a cinder block, had the back door open. The interior of the car smelled of rich leather and warm air. Roman practically shoved her into the back seat, climbing in right behind her and slamming the door shut, cutting off the howl of the wind. "Drive," Roman commanded. Harper huddled against the far door, shivering uncontrollably, clutching his ruined linen handkerchief. "You don't have to do this," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "I can take the bus." Roman turned his head slowly. The look in his eyes was something she'd never seen before, a dark, possessive fury that made the air in the cabin feel dangerously thin. "Gregory Caldwell fired you," he stated, not a question. Harper swallowed hard, nodding once. "Today. Just now." Roman leaned closer. The heat of him was magnetic, pulling at her frozen skin. "Why?" The lie died on her tongue. She looked at this ruthless man, this Mafia phantom who had ruined her mascara and her judgment 3 months ago, and decided the truth couldn't possibly make her life any worse. "Because," Harper said, her voice dropping to a raw, ragged whisper, "I'm pregnant." Silence descended on the Bentley. It was an absolute heavy silence. The only sound was the rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers. Roman didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He simply looked at her face, then slowly lowered his gaze to her stomach, concealed beneath the wet fabric of her cheap blazer. When he looked back up, the dark fury in his eyes had crystallized into something cold, bright, and utterly merciless. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a single number. He didn't wait for a greeting. "Luca," Roman said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I want Caldwell and Associates. All of it. Hostile takeover. Buy the debt, freeze the assets, choke out the shareholders." Harper stopped shivering. She stared at him, her mouth parting in shock. "What are you doing?" Roman ignored her, keeping his eyes locked on hers as he spoke into the phone. "I want the paperwork finalized by Monday morning. And Luca, ensure Gregory Caldwell's personal assets are leveraged in the fallout. I want him ruined." He hung up, tossing the phone onto the leather seat. Harper pressed herself harder against the door. "You can't just buy a company because I got fired." Roman reached out. His large hand, rough with calluses she had memorized in the dark, gently cupped her jaw. His thumb wiped away a stray drop of dirty rain from her cheekbone. "I didn't buy a company because you got fired, Harper," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly intimate register. "I bought a company because Gregory Caldwell just declared war on what belongs to me." The weekend passed in a surreal, velvet-lined blur. Harper spent it in Roman's penthouse, a fortress of glass and steel floating high above the grit of the city. The floors were heated, polished concrete. The bed linens were a thread count she couldn't comprehend. It was a cage, albeit a beautiful one. Roman wasn't there most of the time. He was a ghost who left behind the scent of black coffee and faint, expensive cologne. When he was there, the air cracked with unsaid things. He hadn't asked her for a paternity test. He hadn't asked her for explanations. He had simply installed her in his guest suite, ordered a private physician to check her vitals, and spent the rest of his hours in his home office, the low murmur of his voice bleeding through the heavy oak doors. Harper felt like a fraud. She was wearing a borrowed cashmere sweater that swallowed her frame, eating imported strawberries while her cheap apartment across town sat empty. The electricity likely cut by now. Her independence, the gritty, stubborn survival instinct that had defined her entire adult life, chafed against the luxury. She wanted to be angry with him. She wanted to yell at him for assuming control of her life, for assuming the child was his without a word, for burning down a corporate entity just because he could. But beneath the cynical armour she wore, a treacherous, exhausted part of her was relieved. For the first time in years, she didn't have to fight to keep her head above water. Monday morning arrived with the pale, anemic light of a Chicago sunrise. Roman was waiting for her in the kitchen, fully dressed in a three-piece suit that looked sharp enough to draw blood. His tie was the colour of dried iron. "Eat," he said, nodding to a plate of toast and eggs on the marble island. "Then get dressed. We have a meeting." Harper frowned, wrapping her arms around her chest. "I don't work for you, Roman, and I certainly don't work for Caldwell anymore." Roman poured himself a black coffee, his movements slow, deliberate. "You don't work for Caldwell. Neither does anyone else as of 8 a.m. this morning, but you are going to witness the transition." He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. There was a dangerous hunger in them. "You think I did this for my ego? You think this is some mobster flexing his wallet? I want you to see exactly what happens to men who throw you into the street." An hour later, she was walking back into the lobby of Caldwell and Associates. The revolving doors were the same, the marble floors were the same, but the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. The air was thick with the distinct metallic smell of corporate panic. Phones were ringing off the hook, unanswered. Employees were clustered in small, pale groups near the water coolers, speaking in hushed, frantic whispers. Roman didn't stop at the security desk. He walked through the gates as if he owned the building, which Harper realized with a jolt he now essentially did. He kept one hand firmly pressed against the small of her back, a physical brand of his protection. The warmth of his palm seeped through her silk blouse. When they reached the 42nd floor, the silence was deafening. Caldwell's corner office door was wide open. Inside, a team of men in dark suits, men who looked like accountants but moved like executioners, were silently boxing up files. Gregory Caldwell stood behind his massive mahogany desk, his face the colour of wet cement. He looked older, smaller. His garish purple tie was loose, and sweat stained the armpits of his expensive dress shirt. He looked up as Roman entered, his eyes immediately darting to the heavy men flanking the door, then to Roman, and finally, with a look of absolute sickening comprehension, to Harper. "Rossi," Caldwell croaked. His voice, usually so smooth and commanding, was brittle, cracking at the edges. This is illegal. You can't leverage a buyout like this in a weekend. The SEC is currently reviewing the phantom accounts you use to artificially inflate your Q2 metrics," Roman interrupted. His voice wasn't raised. He spoke with the quiet, devastating calm of a priest reading last rites. Roman walked slowly into the room, stepping over a discarded file folder. Harper stayed by the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You see, Gregory," Roman continued, stopping just in front of the desk, "when you investigate a company for a hostile acquisition, you look under the floorboards. I found the offshore accounts. I found the embezzled pension funds. I found the very quiet, very expensive settlements for workplace harassment." Caldwell sank into his leather chair, the fight draining out of him in a sudden, pathetic rush. He looked at Harper, his eyes pleading. "Harper, please. You know the business. You know how these things go. Tell him." "Tell him what?" Harper asked. Her voice was surprisingly steady. The nausea was gone. In its place was a cold, sharp clarity. She looked at the man who had discarded her like a broken stapler just 3 days ago. She looked at the mahogany table where she had signed away her livelihood. "Tell him that you fired me to cover up your own financial mismanagement?" Harper asked, stepping further into the room. "Tell him that you targeted a pregnant woman because you thought she'd be too panicked, too desperate to fight back or look closely at the severance paperwork." Roman didn't look at her, but she saw his jaw tighten, the muscle ticking furiously. He leaned forward, planting his palms flat on Caldwell's desk. The wood creaked under his weight. "You have 2 options, Caldwell," Roman said softly. "Option 1, you sign everything over to my holding company. You walk out of this building with nothing but the suit on your back. You never work in finance again, and you leave this city by midnight." Caldwell swallowed loudly. And option 2? Roman smiled. It was a terrifying, feral expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Option 2? I let my associates, the ones who don't wear suits, handle the severance." The silence in the room stretched until it felt like a physical weight. The smell of Caldwell's peppermint mouthwash souring with fear filled the air. With shaking hands, Caldwell reached for the gold pen sitting on his blotter. He pulled the thick stack of legal documents Roman's men had placed there, toward him. He signed his name over and over, effectively erasing himself from the world he had ruled. Harper watched him do it. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel heroic. She felt a complicated, messy relief, underscored by a terrifying realization of just how dangerous the man standing beside her truly was. When Caldwell finished, Roman picked up the papers. He handed them to one of his men without looking. "Get out," Roman commanded. Caldwell stood, his legs trembling. He didn't look at Harper as he scurried past her, a broken man retreating into the fluorescent-lit hallway. The room was suddenly empty, save for Harper and Roman. The rain from Friday had finally stopped, and weak sunlight was struggling through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Roman turned to face her. The lethal, cold predator vanished, replaced by the man who had wrapped her in his own coat in an alleyway. He walked toward her, closing the distance until she had to tilt her head up to meet his gaze. "It's yours," Roman said quietly. Harper blinked. "What?" "The company," Roman clarified, reaching out to trace the line of her jaw with his thumb. "I put the holding company in your name. You can liquidate it. You can run it. You can burn it to the ground for warmth. It belongs to you." Harper stared at him, the sheer absurdity of the statement clashing with the intense, unyielding sincerity in his eyes. "Roman, I can't accept a multi-million-dollar firm as a... What is this? An apology gift? A dowry?" "It is justice," Roman corrected, his voice hardening slightly. "It is a fraction of what you are owed." He stepped closer, invading her space, the scent of cedar and dark coffee enveloping her. His hand slid from her jaw down to her neck, his fingers curling gently around her nape. "You think I'm a monster, Harper," he murmured, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin behind her ear. "And you're right. I am. I survive in a world that would eat men like Caldwell alive, but what belongs to me I protect, with everything I have." His other hand, large and warm, moved to rest lightly, deliberately over her stomach. The contrast was dizzying. The ruthless mobster who had just dismantled a man's life with a phone call, now touching her with a reverence that made her chest ache. "You," Roman whispered, his forehead dropping to rest against hers, "and this child. You're mine to protect now, and heaven help anyone who gets in my way." Harper closed her eyes, the internal contradiction tearing at her. She should run. She should take the deed to the company, sell it, and vanish to a quiet suburb where men didn't buy skyscrapers for revenge. But as his heat soaked into her, melting the last lingering chill of Friday's rain, she realized a terrifying truth. She didn't want to run. She opened her eyes, looking up into the dark, stormy gaze of the devil himself. "If I'm running this company," Harper said, her voice dropping to a husky, imperfect whisper, "I'm going to need a new desk. I hate mahogany." Roman's lips curved into a genuine, slow smile. It transformed his face, making him look devastatingly handsome, wiping away the cruelty and leaving only the man she'd met in the dark. "Whatever you want, Mia Cara," he promised, leaning down to claim her lips. "Whatever you want." Power smells like bleached paper and industrial glass cleaner. Harper sat behind her new desk, a slab of frosted glass and cold-brushed steel, rubbing the swollen knot of her lower back. 3 months had passed since the hostile takeover. 3 months of navigating a corporate ecosystem that treated her like an unexploded bomb. The employees didn't respect her. They survived her. Every time she walked past the cubicles, the frantic clattering of keyboards doubled in speed. They looked at her the way people look at a cartel boss's wife. She hated it. And God help her, a dark, exhausted part of her relished it. When she fired Davis from HR, she had worn a sharp grey blazer that actually fit her expanding waistline. He had sweat right through his collar, stammering about severance packages and protocol. Harper hadn't raised her voice. She had simply slid his own manila folder across the frosted glass and watched him crumble. For 10 minutes afterwards, she felt a high so sharp it made her teeth ache. Then the sour acid of heartburn crept up her throat, reminding her that she was just mimicking the monster she lived with. Roman was suffocating. He didn't lock her in the penthouse, but he paved her entire world with velvet and Kevlar. Luca, the cinderblock driver, was now her permanent shadow. If she craved a greasy street pretzel at noon, Luca bought the whole cart. If she had a doctor's appointment, the clinic was emptied of all other patients. It came to a head on a Tuesday evening in the late January. The penthouse smelled of burning oak from the fireplace, and the sharp, medicinal tang of the muscle rub Harper had smeared on her calves. She waddled into Roman's study without knocking. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, the noise vibrating through the Persian rug. Roman didn't flinch. He sat behind his desk, reviewing a stack of shipping manifests. The amber liquid in his crystal glass caught the firelight. He looked up, his dark eyes instantly tracking the furious flush on her cheeks. "I am going to fire Luca," Harper announced. Her voice shook, an embarrassing betrayal of her hormones. Roman set his pen down. The click was loud in the quiet room. "Luca works for me, Harper. You can't fire him." "Then call him off," she paced, or rather lumbered across the room. Her centre of gravity was entirely ruined. The baby, a boy, the ultrasounds confirmed, was currently using her bladder as a trampoline. "I went to a vendor meeting today. Luca stood by the door with his hand inside his jacket. The client thought I was going to have him assassinated if he didn't sign the contract." "Did he sign it?" Roman asked mildly. "That's not the point." Harper grabbed a leather-bound paperweight and slammed it back down. The thud was satisfying. "I am the CEO. I need to be taken seriously for my brain, not because my boyfriend is a mobster who uses intimidation tactics on paper suppliers." Boyfriend. The word hung in the air, absurd and domestic, completely inadequate for whatever they were. Roman stood. He moved with that terrifying liquid grace, rounding the desk until he was standing inches from her. He smelled of scotch, old paper, and violence. "You think I care about the paper supplier?" Roman's voice was a low rumble. He reached out, his large hands finding her hips, anchoring her in place. "There was a hit ordered on a rival family in the West Loop this morning. Bullets went through a coffee shop window, the same coffee shop you like to buy those overpriced pastries from on Tuesdays." Harper's breath hitched. Her anger evaporated, replaced by the icy metallic taste of fear. "What? I don't suffocate you to insult your independence, Harper," he murmured, leaning down until his forehead rested against hers. The heat of his skin was a stark contrast to the cold dread pooling in her stomach. "I do it because if anything happened to you, or my son, I would burn this entire city to the bedrock, and I don't think you want that on your conscience." She closed her eyes. The internal contradiction tore at her ribs. She was a fiercely independent woman who had clawed her way up from nothing. She shouldn't want this. She should reject the blood money, the guards, the heavy suffocating blanket of his protection. But as the baby kicked hard against her ribs and Roman's hand slid down to rest over the precise spot, a tired, cynical voice in her head whispered the truth. She was safe. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to check the locks twice. "Tell Luca," she whispered, her hands coming up to grip the lapels of his tailored shirt, "that if he hovers by the bathroom door again, I will personally demote him to shredding duty." Roman let out a low, rough breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "I'll let him know." Spring broke over Chicago like a shattered glass window, sudden, bright, and still carrying an edge of frost. Harper was 8 months pregnant. Her feet were perpetually swollen. Her patience was non-existent, and she was entirely done playing nice. The Q1 board meeting was held in the same mahogany-panelled slaughterhouse where Caldwell had fired her. She refused to change the room. She kept it as a reminder. She sat at the head of the table. To her right sat the remaining executives, a row of pale, anxious men clutching their iPads. To her left sat Roman. He had no official title at the company, but he attended every board meeting. He never spoke. He just sat in a custom-built leather chair, scrolling through his phone, emanating a lethal, quiet menace. "The projections for the Miller account are down," Peterson, the VP of Acquisitions, said. He was a holdover from the Caldwell era, a man with a comb-over and the smug, patronizing tone of a country club regular. He looked at Harper, then flicked his eyes nervously toward Roman before emboldening himself. "With respect, Ms. Harper, your unique ascension to this role didn't come with the operational experience required to salvage this portfolio. Perhaps we should consider bringing in an outside consultant." Silence fell over the room. It was thick, suffocating. Harper could hear the ticking of Peterson's Rolex. Roman stopped scrolling on his phone. He didn't look up, but his thumb hovered completely still over the screen. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. Harper felt a familiar spike of nausea, but it wasn't morning sickness. It was rage. She didn't look at Roman. She didn't ask for his help. She placed her hands flat on the frosted glass ledger in front of her. "An outside consultant," Harper repeated. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. It sounded a lot like Roman's. "To salvage the Miller account. The same account that you, Peterson, authorized a 30% discount on last October to secure your end-of-year bonus." Peterson's smugness vanished, replaced by a pasty, sickly white. That was standard client retention strategy. It was financial bleeding to pad your own wallet, Harper countered. She pulled a thick, tabbed binder from her side and dropped it onto the table. The loud smack made 2 of the junior executives flinch. "I spent the weekend auditing your division. You've been using archaic vendor contracts that are costing us 14% above market rate, purely because the vendor takes you golfing in Boca." She leaned forward, her pregnant belly pressed against the edge of the table, a stark reminder of exactly why she was sitting in this chair. "I don't need a consultant to fix your mess, Peterson," she said, her voice dropping an octave, razor-sharp and merciless. "I need you to clean out your desk by noon. You're fired." Peterson opened his mouth, his eyes darting to Roman in sheer panic, looking for... What? Mercy from the devil? Roman finally looked up. He pocketed his phone, a slow, predatory smirk spreading across his face. He looked at Peterson, then looked at Harper, his eyes dark with an unmasked, burning pride. "You heard the CEO," Roman said quietly. "Noon." The meeting dissolved shortly after. The executives practically sprinted out of the room, leaving the scent of stale sweat and expensive cologne in their wake. Harper stayed in her chair. The adrenaline crash hit her hard. She let her head fall back against the headrest, closing her eyes as a dull ache throbbed in her temples. The baby rolled, a heavy, fluid movement that made her gasp softly. Footsteps approached. They weren't hurried. They were measured, heavy, leather soles against the carpet. Roman stopped behind her chair. His hands found her shoulders, his thumbs pressing firmly into the knotted muscles at the base of her neck. The tension began to melt under the brutal, perfect heat of his touch. "You didn't need me to bury him," Roman murmured, his voice rumbling near her ear. "I don't bury people," Harper said, keeping her eyes closed. "I just read the spreadsheets." "Blood and ink, Miyakara," he whispered, pressing a kiss to the crown of her hair. "They both leave stains." Later that night the rain returned. It wasn't the freezing, spiteful sleet of October. It was a heavy, warm spring downpour that washed the smog from the city skyline. Harper stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, wearing one of Roman's discarded dress shirts over her bare legs. She held a mug of decaf tea, watching the headlights of the cars far below blur into streaks of red and white through the wet glass. She wasn't standing in an alleyway anymore. Her shoes weren't leaking. Roman walked up behind her. He didn't say a word. He just wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his solid chest. His large hands spread wide over her swollen belly, possessing, protecting. Harper leaned her weight into him. The smell of cedarwood, dark coffee and rain settled around them. She knew the man holding her was a criminal. She knew the empire she now ran was bought with dirty money and intimidation. Her moral compass, once a rigid line of black and white, had been hopelessly, irrevocably shattered. But as Roman's son kicked against his father's palm, and Roman's lips brushed the sensitive skin beneath her jaw, Harper took a sip of her tea and watched the storm rage outside. Let the rain fall. She finally had an umbrella. If you felt the raw tension and unforgiving corporate revenge in Harper and Roman's story, don't just keep scrolling. Hit that like button to support unapologetic, gritty storytelling. Share this video with someone who loves a deeply flawed but fiercely protective romance. And make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next intense audio drama. Drop a comment below. Did Harper handle Peterson the right way, or should she have let Roman take care of him? Let me know